It all started the night I decided to take a shortcut home. I had stayed late at work and missed the last bus, leaving me with no choice but to walk. The streets were quiet, bathed in the dim glow of flickering streetlights. I should have stuck to the main roads, but the shortcut through the alley seemed like a quicker option. I regretted that decision almost immediately. The alley was narrow, the walls on either side pressing in uncomfortably close. The only sound was the echo of my footsteps on the wet pavement. Halfway through, I noticed someone leaning against the wall up ahead. A man, his face obscured by shadows, his posture unnervingly still. I considered turning around, but pride, or maybe foolishness, kept me moving forward. As I passed him, I avoided eye contact and quickened my pace. But just as I thought I was in the clear, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate, matching my speed. I glanced over my shoulder. The man was following me, his dark silhouette outlined by the faint light at the end of the alley. I told myself he was just going the same way, but my instincts screamed otherwise. My heart pounded as I reached the main road, where the streetlights were brighter, the space more open. I thought he'd stop, but he didn't. He stayed behind me, always keeping the same distance. I ducked into a convenience store, hoping to lose him. Pretending to browse, I kept an eye on the glass door. Sure enough, he stopped outside. He didn't come in, didn't look at me directly. He just stood there, waiting. The cashier noticed my unease. "Everything okay?" he asked. I hesitated but nodded. What could I say? That a man was standing outside? That he hadn't done anything, but something about him filled me with dread? It sounded paranoid, ridiculous. After 10 minutes, I decided to leave. I made a point of walking confidently, telling myself I was imagining things. But as I turned the corner, I saw him again. He had somehow gotten ahead of me, standing at the edge of the street like he'd been expecting me. I crossed the road, pretending I didn't see him. But no matter which way I turned, he was always there, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind. I wasn't sure how he was doing it. It felt like a game to him, a twisted dance in which he always led, and I had no choice but to follow. By the time I reached my apartment building, I was shaking. I hurried inside, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it. I went to the window, expecting to see him outside. But the street was empty. I barely slept that night. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. By morning, I convinced myself it was over. Maybe he'd just been messing with me. Maybe he was gone. But then I saw it. On my kitchen counter, next to my keys, was a note, written in messy, jagged handwriting. It read, "Nice place. I'll see you again soon." My blood ran cold. The doors had been locked, the windows shut. There was no sign of forced entry. Whoever he was, he had been inside. I moved out a week later, but no matter where I go, I always feel his presence. I never take shortcuts anymore, and at night, I keep my lights on and my doors double-locked. But still, I can't shake the feeling that he's watching, waiting, and that someday he'll come back. It started with a phone call. Nothing sinister, at least not at first. I was unpacking boxes in my new apartment when my phone buzzed on the counter. The number was unlisted, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello," I answered. For a moment, there was silence. Then, faintly, I heard breathing. Not the casual, unaware kind of breathing. This was deliberate, like someone wanted me to know they were there. I hung up, brushing it off as a prank, and went back to unpacking. The second call came later that night, as I was getting ready for bed. The same unlisted number. I let it go to voicemail this time, but they didn't leave a message. By the third call, I was annoyed. I picked up and shouted into the receiver, "Who is this?" No answer. Just the same deliberate breathing. The calls became a nightly ritual. Always unlisted. Always silence or breathing. I tried blocking unknown numbers, but somehow they always found a way through. It got to the point where I stopped answering altogether, but that didn't stop the phone from ringing at odd hours, piercing through the quiet of my apartment like a scream. One night, I decided to call my phone company to trace the number. The representative sounded puzzled. "There's no incoming number registered," she said. "Are you sure you're not mistaken?" "Mistaken?" I was holding my phone in my hand as it buzzed with yet another call. It wasn't just the calls, though. I started noticing strange things around my apartment. My curtains, which I always left drawn, would be slightly open when I returned from work. A picture frame on my mantle had been turned upside down. Little things, subtle enough to make me doubt myself. Then there were the footprints. One snowy evening, I came home and noticed a trail of footprints leading from the sidewalk to my front door. They weren't mine. I hadn't been home since the snow began falling. My heart raced as I unlocked the door, every shadow inside my apartment suddenly threatening. I called the police after that. They checked the locks, searched the apartment, and assured me no one had broken in. Probably kids messing around, the officer said, his tone dismissive. But deep down, I knew it wasn't kids. The breaking point came a week later. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my phone buzzing. This time, it wasn't an unlisted number. It was my own. Confused and half asleep, I picked up. "Hello." A voice answered, low and gravelly. "I'm inside." I froze, the phone slipping from my hand. The line went dead. For a moment, all I could hear was my own panicked breathing. Then, faintly, I heard the creak of a floorboard in the hallway. I grabbed a baseball bat I kept by my bed and dialed 911 with trembling hands. "Someone's in my apartment," I whispered to the operator, my voice barely audible. The operator stayed on the line as I locked my bedroom door and waited. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, I heard the distant wail of sirens and a loud banging on my front door. "Police!" When they searched the apartment, they didn't find anyone. But they did find something far worse. Under my bed was a small hidden camera. The police told me it had been there for weeks, capturing everything. The footage revealed a man, thin, with hollow eyes, entering my apartment through a window multiple times. He was the one moving my belongings, leaving the curtains open, watching me. The last clip? It showed him hiding in my closet, just hours before I made the call. I moved out the next day, leaving everything behind. The police never found him, and I never got another call. But sometimes, late at night, when my phone buzzes with a notification, I can't help but freeze, expecting to hear that same deliberate breathing on the other end. I don't think I'll ever feel safe again. I had just moved into a small, cheap apartment in an old building downtown. It wasn't anything fancy. Peeling wallpaper, creaky wooden floors, and questionable plumbing. But it was all I could afford. The building had a history, though no one seemed keen to talk about it. The landlord mentioned something about it being charmingly vintage, but the vibe was more haunted antique. The first week was uneventful. Work, home, sleep, repeat. But then I started noticing strange things. It began with the feeling of being watched. You know that prickling sensation on the back of your neck? I glanced around my tiny apartment, but there was nothing out of place. Still, the unease lingered. Then I started hearing noises. It was subtle at first, soft creaks in the floorboards, faint tapping sounds coming from beneath my bed. I chalked it up to the old building settling or maybe mice. But then the noises got louder. One night, I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it, a long, deliberate scrape, like something being dragged across wood. My heart froze. It was coming from directly beneath me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was nothing. But as the days passed, the sounds grew more frequent and more distinct. At first, it was just scraping. Then came faint thuds, like someone was shifting their weight, trying to move quietly, but not quite succeeding. The next morning, I told the landlord about the noises. He waved it off, saying the building had old pipes that made strange sounds. He didn't seem concerned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong. A few nights later, I woke up to the noise again, this time louder. It wasn't just scraping. It sounded like muffled whispers, too quiet to make out, but unmistakably human. I grabbed a flashlight and crept around the apartment, checking every corner. Finally, I crouched near the floorboards where the sound seemed loudest. I pressed my ear to the ground and listened. There it was clearer now. Someone was speaking. My breath hitched as I strained to make out the words. "You can't hide forever. I see you." I leapt back, heart pounding. It had to be my imagination, right? Maybe an echo from another apartment. But when I told the landlord again, he brushed me off. "This building has thin walls," he said. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept my flashlight on, clutching my phone. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again, scraping, followed by what sounded like a quiet laugh. I snapped. I pried up one of the loose floorboards. Beneath it was a narrow crawl space, barely wide enough for a person. Shining my flashlight inside, I saw nothing but darkness at first. Then something moved. A hand. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. The hand withdrew, vanishing into the shadows. My scream echoed through the empty apartment. The police came after I called them, trembling and barely able to speak. They searched the crawl space and found something that made my stomach churn. A small, filthy mattress, empty food wrappers, and a notebook filled with detailed observations about me. My name, my schedule, even things I'd never told anyone. The person was gone, but they had been there, living beneath my floorboards, watching me through tiny cracks. The police assured me they'd keep an eye out, but they never found the person. I moved out the next day, but the story doesn't end there. In the months that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. At night, I'd hear faint tapping sounds, sometimes coming from the walls of my new apartment. I told myself it was paranoia, but deep down I knew better. One night, while unpacking a box I'd ignored for weeks, I found something that didn't belong to me. The notebook. The same one the police had found in the crawl space. I dropped it like it was on fire, my breath hitching as dread surged through me. Inside the cover, scrawled in shaky handwriting, was a single line. Asterisk, did you really think you could get away? Asterisk, I haven't slept soundly since.